Hello. My girlfriend said she wanted an open relationship, but only for herself. I said okay, packed up her stuff, and changed the locks. She sued me, but the court ended up ordering her to pay me $7,400. My name is Brad. I am 34, and I work as a corporate attorney for a mid-sized law firm in Oklahoma City. Most of my days are spent reviewing contracts, preparing filings, and dealing with clients who would rather avoid problems than fix them properly. The hours can be long, but the work is structured and the pay is solid, which is exactly why I chose the field. I own a 3-bedroom house on the northwest side of the city. Nothing flashy, but comfortable. Small backyard, 2-car garage, quiet neighborhood. I bought it a few years before this situation happened, and I have handled the mortgage and property taxes on my own since then. My routine during the week is pretty consistent. I leave for the office around 8, get back home sometime between 6 and 7 depending on how the day goes, and usually spend the evening unwinding at home. Some nights I read. Other nights I watch a game or catch up on emails I did not finish earlier. My girlfriend Nicole is 29 and works as a hairstylist at a busy salon near downtown. When everything started, we had been together a little over 2 years, and she had been living in my house for about 8 months. The house and all the utilities were in my name since I owned it long before we met. Early on, things were easy to manage. I handled the major expenses like the mortgage, utilities, and insurance. Nicole usually paid for groceries and sometimes covered dinners out or weekend plans. It was not mathematically perfect, but it felt reasonable enough that neither of us made it an issue. Nicole had a sharper personality than I do. She liked arguing her point, and she rarely backed down once she decided she was right. Sometimes it came across as a little abrasive, but most of the time I treated it as simple stubbornness. Still, I deal with problems early. That habit comes from my job. Ignoring something that is clearly wrong usually turns a small issue into a larger one. That approach ended up maturing a lot a few weeks ago when Nicole came home from work and told me she had been thinking about our relationship. She said she had come up with what she called a modern solution to something that had been bothering her. At first I assumed she meant counseling or maybe taking some time apart. What she actually proposed was something very different. And the way she explained it told me a lot about how she viewed our relationship. Nicole brought it up on a Tuesday evening while I was finishing leftovers at the kitchen counter. She had just come home from the salon and still had that restless energy she sometimes carried after work. She did not ease into the topic. She sat across from me, folded her arms, and said she had been doing a lot of thinking about relationships. When Nicole says she has been doing a lot of thinking, it usually means she has already decided what the answer should be and is preparing to explain why everyone else needs to accept it. She started talking about how traditional relationships were outdated and how people were too restrictive with each other. At first, it sounded like a random rant about social media trends and podcasts she had been listening to during her commute. Then she got to the point. She said she thought our relationship would be healthier if we made it open. I asked what she meant by that, because sometimes people use the term loosely. Nicole clarified very quickly. She said she wanted the freedom to see other people if she felt like it. Nothing serious, according to her. Just experiences. Just options. I waited a second and asked the obvious follow-up question. Did that mean I would also be seeing other people? That was when her tone shifted slightly. She leaned back in the chair and said no, not exactly. According to Nicole, the arrangement only made sense if she was the one with outside options. She said my personality was not the type that needed that kind of freedom. She even said it like she was doing me a favor by simplifying things. Her exact reasoning was that I was stable and predictable while she was more social and adventurous. So in her mind, the fair arrangement was simple. She would be allowed to see other people. I would stay committed to her. She delivered this whole explanation with the same confidence someone uses when presenting a clever business idea. Nicole clearly expected resistance. She was already preparing arguments about insecurity and modern relationships. Instead, I just nodded once and said okay. The reaction confused her immediately. She narrowed her eyes and asked if I was serious. I told her I was completely serious. What she did not realize yet was that my answer had nothing to do with accepting her proposal. Nicole looked confused when I said okay, but she quickly assumed it meant I had accepted her idea. She even smiled a little like she had just won an argument that had not actually happened. She started explaining what the rules would look like. According to her, honesty was important, but she did not think details were necessary. She said if she went out with someone, I did not need to ask questions. It was supposed to be casual and modern. While she was talking, I stood up and rinsed my plate in the sink. Nicole kept going, clearly enjoying the sound of her own explanation. Then she noticed I was not really engaging. She asked if I had anything to say. I told her I understood her position. If she wanted the freedom to date other people, that was her decision. But it also meant something very simple. She was no longer my girlfriend. Nicole stared at me like I had just switched languages. I repeated it slowly so there was no confusion. If she wanted a relationship where she could see other people, she was free to do that. Just not while living in my house as my partner. She immediately got defensive and said that was not what she meant. According to her, the relationship itself was supposed to stay the same. The only difference was that she would have outside options. I shook my head and told her that arrangement did not work for me. Then I asked a practical question. How quickly could she pack? At first she thought I was joking. When she realized I was serious, the tone changed fast. She said I was overreacting and being insecure. I did not argue. I simply walked upstairs, grabbed 2 empty suitcases from the closet, and set them on the bedroom floor. Nicole followed me, still talking, still explaining why I was being unreasonable. I did not debate any of it. I just started packing her clothes. Once she realized what was happening, the anger kicked in. She started calling me dramatic and controlling. But the situation was simple. She had just told me she wanted the freedom to date other men. So I made sure she had the freedom to do it somewhere else. Nicole argued for about 20 minutes while I packed. At first, she kept trying to reframe the situation like I had misunderstood her. Then she switched to saying I was being insecure and dramatic. None of that changed the basic point. She had asked for a relationship where she could see other people while still living in my house as my girlfriend. I told her clearly that she was free to see whoever she wanted, just not while being in a relationship with me and living under my roof. That distinction made her furious. She said I was punishing her for being honest. She also tried the argument that technically she lived there too now. That part was easy to address. Her name was not on the mortgage. It was not on the property records. It was not on any lease because there was no lease. She had moved in as my girlfriend, not as a legal tenant. Once the suitcases were full, I carried them downstairs and set them by the front door. Nicole was still talking behind me, switching between anger and disbelief like she expected the situation to reverse if she kept arguing long enough. It did not. I told her she should call a friend or get a rideshare because she was not staying there that night. She stared at me for a moment like she thought I might back down. When I did not, she grabbed her phone and ordered a ride while muttering under her breath about how ridiculous I was being. The car showed up about 15 minutes later. Nicole dragged the suitcases outside and turned around one last time on the front walkway. She said I would regret this and that I had just thrown away a perfectly good relationship because of my ego. I did not argue with her. At that point, there was nothing left to debate. Once the car drove off, I closed the front door and locked it. Then I did the practical thing. The next morning before work, I stopped by a locksmith and scheduled a lock change for that afternoon. It was not about revenge or drama. It was simply about making sure the situation stayed clear. Nicole had made it very clear she wanted the freedom to date other people. Now she had it, just not from inside my house. The locksmith came the next afternoon while I was working from home. It took him maybe 15 minutes to replace the front and back door cylinders. I paid the bill, tested both locks, and that was the end of it. From my perspective, the situation was already finished. Nicole had asked for a relationship that did not include basic exclusivity. I declined and made the living arrangement match that decision. It was straightforward. For the first 2 days, I did not hear from her at all. Then the messages started. The first one came late Thursday night. Nicole sent a long text saying I had embarrassed her and forced her to stay with a friend because of my overreaction. According to her, the mature thing would have been discussing boundaries instead of throwing her out. I read the message once and did not respond. About an hour later, she sent another one asking when she could come by to pick up the rest of her things. That part actually surprised me because I had already packed almost everything she owned that was clearly hers. Clothes, makeup, shoes, hair tools, and the small boxes she had brought when she moved in. The only items still in the house were a few random things in the bathroom drawer and some products in the shower. Still, I replied the next morning and told her she could come by Saturday afternoon. I also told her to text before arriving so I would be home. Nicole responded with a thumbs-up emoji. Saturday came and went. She never showed up. Instead, I received another message late that evening saying she had been busy and would stop by sometime next week. At that point, I started to suspect the situation was not actually finished in Nicole's mind. Because instead of just collecting her last few items and moving on, She seemed more interested in continuing the argument we had already ended. And the following week proved that suspicion right. Nicole did not come back to pick up her things. She came back with a completely different plan. About a week after Nicole left, I received an envelope in the mail that had my full name typed neatly across the front. The return address belonged to a small legal office in Oklahoma City. Considering what I do for a living, that immediately got my attention. Inside the envelope was a formal letter informing me that Nicole was pursuing legal action regarding what she described as an unlawful eviction and wrongful removal of her property. I read it twice just to make sure I was not missing something. According to the letter, Nicole was claiming that she had established residency in my house during the 8 months she lived there. Because of that, she argued that I had no right to remove her or change the locks without proper notice. The letter also claimed I had created emotional distress by forcing her to leave the residence abruptly. The suggested resolution was simple. Nicole wanted compensation. Specifically, she wanted several $1,000s to cover temporary housing, emotional distress, and the cost of replacing certain belongings she claimed were missing. That was the moment I realized she had not just been arguing with me out of anger. She had actually convinced herself that she was the victim in the situation. The strange part was that Nicole clearly expected the letter itself to scare me into settling quickly. The tone was written like the outcome was obvious. But there was one small detail she had apparently forgotten. My profession. I deal with contracts, liability issues, and documentation every day. Reading a demand letter is not exactly an intimidating experience when it is literally part of your daily work. So instead of reacting emotionally, I did the same thing I always do when something legal shows up on my desk. I reviewed the facts. First, Nicole was never on a lease. Second, she never paid rent. Third, the house was solely in my name and always had been. Fourth, I had multiple messages from her clearly stating she wanted the freedom to date other people while remaining in the relationship. None of that looked like the strong legal case she seemed to think it was. Still, once lawyers get involved, the situation stops being about emotions and starts being about documentation. And that meant the next step was simple. I responded through my own attorney. Nicole probably expected a quick payout. Instead, she was about to learn how expensive bad legal advice can get. I forwarded the letter to a colleague at my firm who handles civil disputes. Technically, I could have responded myself, but when personal matters are involved, it is smarter to let someone else stay objective. He read through everything in about 10 minutes and started laughing. Not in a mocking way. More like the kind of laugh you give when someone walks into a poker game without understanding the rules. The demand letter Nicole's attorney sent was aggressive in tone, but the actual legal footing behind it was thin. My colleague pointed out a few things immediately. First, Nicole had moved into the house voluntarily without any lease or rental agreement. Second, she had never paid rent or contributed to the mortgage. Third, she had left the property with her belongings without being physically forced out or denied access to collect them later. Those details matter more than people realize. The biggest problem for Nicole was documentation. I had texts showing she arranged her own ride that night. I also had messages offering her a time to collect anything else she wanted from the house. Nothing about that looks like someone illegally locking a tenant out of their residence. My colleague drafted a response letter the same afternoon. It was professional, calm, and very direct. It explained that Nicole had been a guest in the home, not a tenant. It also stated clearly that her claim for damages had no factual basis and would be challenged if she continued pursuing it. The final paragraph suggested something important. If Nicole chose to continue legal action despite the lack of merit, we would request reimbursement for legal fees. That part tends to make people reconsider their position. Nicole apparently did not. 2 weeks later, I was notified that she had officially filed a claim in small claims court. At that point, the situation moved from annoying to slightly ridiculous. Because instead of accepting the end of the relationship and moving on, Nicole had decided to turn the entire thing into a legal battle. What she probably did not realize was that courtrooms are not places where confidence wins arguments. Evidence does. The hearing was scheduled about a month later at the Oklahoma County Courthouse. Small claims court is not as dramatic as people imagine. There is no jury and no long speeches. Most of the process is short explanations, documents, and a judge who has already seen dozens of similar disputes that week. Nicole arrived with her attorney and barely acknowledged me in the hallway. She had the same confident expression she always used when she believed she had already won an argument. When the case was called, We went inside and both sides were asked to explain what happened. Nicole's attorney spoke first. He argued that Nicole had established residency in my home and that I had illegally removed her without proper notice. According to their claim, she had been forced to find temporary housing and had suffered financial and emotional damages. If you only listened to that version, it sounded like I had thrown a tenant onto the street with no warning. Then it was our turn. My attorney kept it simple and walked through the actual timeline. He explained that Nicole had moved into my house as a girlfriend without any lease or rental agreement. He showed the judge the property records confirming I was the sole owner of the house. Then he submitted the text messages. One message showed Nicole explaining the open relationship arrangement she wanted. Another showed her ordering a ride and leaving the house with the suitcases she packed. Another message showed me offering a specific time for her to return and collect anything else she wanted. The judge spent a few minutes quietly reading everything. Then he asked Nicole 3 direct questions. Did she sign a lease? No. Did she ever pay rent? No. Was she prevented from returning to collect the rest of her belongings? Also no. The judge leaned back and explained that living in someone's home as a romantic partner does not automatically create tenant rights without a lease, rent payments, or any agreement establishing tenancy. Her claim was dismissed on the spot. But the hearing did not end there. My attorney then requested reimbursement for the legal costs Nicole caused by filing a claim that had no legal foundation. The judge reviewed the submitted expenses, which included attorney fees and filing costs. After a short pause, he approved the request. Nicole was ordered to pay me $7,400. Nicole's reaction was immediate. Up until that moment, she had been sitting there with the same irritated confidence she had carried since the case started. But when the judge stated the amount she owed, the expression changed fast. She looked at her attorney like she expected him to correct the judge. He did not. The judge explained the reasoning in a calm tone. Filing a claim that lacks legal foundation still forces the other party to spend time and money defending themselves. Courts do not reward that behavior, especially when the documentation clearly shows the situation was misrepresented. In simple terms, Nicole tried to turn a breakup into a lawsuit, and it backfired. The $7,400 covered the legal fees my attorney documented, along with filing costs and time spent responding to the claim. Nicole tried to argue that the amount was unfair, but the judge cut that off quickly. The order had already been entered. If she disagreed, she could pursue an appeal through the proper process. That was the end of the hearing. We stepped out into the hallway, and Nicole finally spoke directly to me for the first time that day. She said this whole thing had gotten out of control and that I should have just talked to her instead of escalating everything. I did not bother arguing with her. The strange part about situations like this is how people rewrite the timeline in their own heads. From her perspective, I had escalated things. From my perspective, the chain of events was simple. She asked for a one-sided open relationship. I ended the relationship. She chose to turn that into a legal fight. And now a judge had finished it. Nicole left the courthouse without saying anything else. My attorney and I walked to the parking lot, and he joked that it was one of the most expensive relationship lessons he had ever seen someone give themselves. At the time, I assumed that was the end of it, but there was still one final piece to the story that happened afterward. About 3 weeks after the hearing, I received confirmation that Nicole had paid the judgment. There was no dramatic confrontation and no long conversation attached to it. The payment arrived through the normal court process, exactly the way the order required. Once it cleared, the matter was officially closed. The entire situation, from the night she brought up the open relationship idea to the final payment, took a little under 3 months. Looking back at it, the strange part is how avoidable the whole thing was. If Nicole had simply said she wanted a different kind of relationship, we could have ended things that same night and moved on like normal adults. Breakups happen all the time. They do not need to turn into legal disputes. But Nicole did not want a clean ending. She wanted the relationship to stay exactly the same while giving herself extra options. When that did not happen, she tried to frame the situation like I had wronged her. That strategy might work in arguments with friends or on social media. It does not work very well in courtrooms where everything is based on documentation and basic facts. In the end, the entire chain of events came down to a simple moment in my kitchen when she explained the arrangement she wanted. She expected a debate. She expected negotiation. Instead, she got a very direct answer. Okay, just not the version of okay she had in mind. She wanted the freedom to see other people. And technically, she got exactly that. just without the house, the relationship, or the expectation that I would finance the situation while it happened. The most expensive part of the whole story was not the breakup. It was the decision she made afterward to fight something that had already been finished. And that decision ended up costing her $7,400. Bye-bye.